Welcome back to your Prime Your Midlife podcast. And I'm here today with Rich Wharton, and he's going to talk about something that maybe you just never even realized you've been through, which is postnatal depression as a bloke. Rich Wharton, welcome to the podcast. How are you today, mate?
Thank you, Chris. Yeah, I'm amazing. Thank you. How are you?
I'm very, very well. Thank you very much. And first of all, I want to appreciate you for writing this book, Life Behind the Mask. Well done for being an author, first of all. I am still on that page of trying to be an author. How long did it take you to get this out of the mind and onto the pen and into the book?
You know what? Weirdly enough, I actually started it while I was suffering with postnatal depression, and it's something I just put aside, didn't really think of, and then all of a sudden I set myself a week. I actually had COVID that week, believe it or not. Decided I'm going to complete this book and went and did it. So it was as simple as that. So it took a week, but actually it took like well over a year. So if that doesn't really answer the question, but that's how it is.
So it was in your head for a year, but it took a week to then get it into a written format.
That's it. The stories that I talk about and my life experiences is what I lived at the time, and I wrote it down at the time. So a lot of the stories within my book are very raw. They're very recent. But then the latter parts of it, of how I helped my recovery, that was all obviously all written after I had my recovery, and therefore that only took a week to sort of finalize and finish, which is great.
Okay, so one of my first questions I always ask a guest, and you're nowhere near your midlife point yet, but assuming you were thinking about midlife, which is probably what, about 10 years time for you, maybe? Are you about 30 at the moment?
I'm 31 as of 2 days ago, so yes.
Well, congratulations, and I'm sorry I missed it. So yeah, you're kind of moving into about 10 years time, statistically, is when you'll be there. What are your thoughts on the word crisis or mindset? How do you perceive it, knowing what journey you've already been through in terms of your postnatal depression experience?
Yeah, it's a great question. And you know what, it's one of those things where when I thought about it, like you said, don't really want to call it a midlife crisis, especially seeing as being early 30s, midlife isn't that long away. But the biggest thing for me is it's all about living an experience and realizing where you are and where you thought you should be. And I think so many men do have a midlife crisis because they just follow the process to what they think they should be living, rather than actually having that happiness and living their own happiness. And I've learned at a relatively early age, it was probably about 3-4 years ago, I realized that actually being unhappy is just not a way of life. You do not have to be unhappy. Yes, you may need to make some changes, and it takes some time to have that end goal of being happy. But yeah, for me, midlife crisis hits when people realize that actually they're on a path where they don't like, they haven't enjoyed where they've been, and it's kind of like they need a change, and it's just that breaking point, as it were.
Okay, so Rich, postnatal depression, what were you thinking, mate? I mean, we're the rocks of society. We're the ones to cheer the mums and everybody else on. What possessed you to write a book about this?
So, funnily enough, my background is in the emergency services. Been in the emergency services for over 10 years. Been a firefighter for the latter part of them. As a firefighter, you're witnessing trauma day in, day out. You are the rock. It's that really. And it's not supposed to be, but you're that manly sort of. I'm here. I'm a warrior. I'm unbreakable. That was that sort of mentality. And obviously, being a father as well, you are that rock. You're that stone. You're that I am unbreakable. I am the person who's going to keep this family up. It's me who I've got to take the brunt of it. I've got to look after my wife. I've got to look after my children. And I was motivational. I was massively into my mindset, being a life coach, a health and wellness coach. I'm really passionate about health and well-being. And for me, I just thought things won't affect me. They can't affect me. I can't allow them to affect me. But when they were affecting me, and I was struggling, and hence why the name of the book is Life Behind the Mask, because I genuinely felt like that. I was putting on a face to people of who I thought I should be, and I was feeling completely different behind. And yeah, that was the thing for me, was when I actually realized that I needed some help. I was struggling. I needed to find some sort of support. And a lot of the book is like, I didn't know where to turn to, because everyone had a perception of me. But when I did realize that and went and got the support, actually, that was my cue to turn around and go, I need to do something in this world to help others who may be in my situation, and sort of change that sort of mentality and that stigma around men, and especially being like a new parent. So I couldn't find information. That was one of my reasons for writing the book. I really struggled to find information about postnatal depression in men. So I wrote a book. I thought, you know, if it's meant to be, it's up to me. So I went and did it.
I love that. It's up to me. I've done a little bit of research just to obviously recognize the fact that we're here talking. And I was astounded actually by some of the numbers. And also when postnatal depression sort of starts to resonate with us as a male, and you know, the numbers sound like 10% in the third trimester, and then even as much as 26% of males in the first 3 to 6 months. When did these first thoughts of depression associated with your firstborn, was it your firstborn or your secondborn, or did it happen both times?
It was my secondborn. So I didn't actually suffer at all with my firstborn, or not that I realized. I think part of it is that realization that you're struggling. I know for a lot of men in particular, you know, and especially with a first child, you're number one. You're the most important thing to your partner at that time, until this new life comes along, and then you are quite clearly number two. You are taking a back seat in that, and yeah, it is a bit of a shock. It's a massive change. You know, you've got a different sort of life, a different relationship. But yeah, number two was the one that where I struggled. You know, there was a lot going on in my life anyway. But having Archie, that was when I really noticed that I was struggling. And I think the statistics, though show an incredible picture, they may be misleading in a sense that, you know, a lot of men don't even realize or don't want to admit that they are struggling. And a lot of men don't get even asked how they feel. It's kind of like, you know, I did notice, especially when people are saying their congratulations, they're like, you must be so proud, or you must be delighted. And the easiest thing to do is just go, yeah. And just,
well, that's what we're conformed to do, isn't it? By way of a reaction. And we kind of play along with what we should be doing, because that's what the expectation says that the act we should be performing. But I'm curious, tell me, when you started to have feelings, was it depression with yourself? Was it anger towards Archie? Was it resentment towards your partner as to how you were no longer the number one? Tell me more about what feelings were really landing with you.
Yeah, so it was weird really, because when I first started realizing something was going on, I was just getting angry for no apparent reason. And one of the biggest things was when Archie was crying, you know, and he's a baby. The babies cry when they want or need something. And, you know, at first when you pick him up and you give him a cuddle and you hope that those tears stop, and he keeps crying, and I just felt anger build up inside me. And I just want to make it clear, and I made this clear in my book, that there was no anger towards my son. It was just anger that was just, I used to just shout or swear, or, you know, and then obviously that didn't help. That didn't stop him crying. I put him back down, took myself away from him. Again, he was like, again, making this clear, he was never in any harm. There was never any feelings of hurting him or anyone else. It was just an anger for me. But once I've shouted or sworn, it made me even feel even worse, because I was then upset that I allowed myself to do that. Or, you know, I called my son a name or something, and, you know, you're just like, he's a baby, he's supposed to cry. But that was the feelings inside me. It was just that anger. And obviously, as that went on, it made it quite difficult for my wife as well. She was seeing me being angry. It got to a stage where I wasn't feeling comfortable being left at home with my son. It's like, what if I can't stop him crying? What do I do? So I felt like she can essentially leave. I then covered myself in work. I worked more and more and more, essentially just to separate myself from family life. And it just spirals. It just spirals essentially out of control just by adding more and more things in.
And I'm curious, how much did sleep deprivation play as part of this mix? Looking backwards now, do you feel that was a contributory factor, or were you getting good sleep?
No, absolutely. I mean, because of being a firefighter, the thing for me was, and I really sort of noticed this, was the fact that when I was at home, my sleep was deprived because I had a newborn. When I was at work, my sleep was deprived because, and yes, we do get a chance to sleep before anyone else pipes up on that, but my sleep was deprived because, you know, of going on shouts and going to incidents and stuff. And it, you know, I never had a proper sleep. I was either at home listening out for my son and being half asleep there, or I was at work half asleep listening out for the bells to go down to go on an incident. So it was hard work. It was never a proper sleep.
Okay. And when you had those moments of anger, which you talked about, anger with yourself, and you shouted and you swore, and thank you for being so honest about that, by the way. What was the emotion that you then felt? Was it guilt? Was it shame? What was the introspective view that you had of yourself in that moment when you should have been perhaps this, stereotypically perfect dad, so appreciative of the fact that Archie was around? What were you feeling?
Yeah, it's a bit of everything, really. Obviously, I felt disappointed in myself to get upset by it, and in a way, a little bit of a failure of a parent. Like Amelia, my first child, everything went really, really well. We literally, it was literally the perfect pregnancy, the perfect birth, the perfect afterbirth, as it were. Everything seemed to go swimmingly, and then obviously with Archie, obviously I've struggled, and it just felt to myself like, what am I doing wrong? And the answer was, I wasn't doing anything wrong. It was just what was going on, and there was some things I needed to sort out myself. But it was tough. It was tough, and it made me upset, the fact that I had allowed myself to get to that stage. There was blame on myself for allowing that to happen. There was times where I just had to remove myself. I remember going for a walk in the middle of the night just because I say I couldn't cope. I make that sound worse than it is. It was never any intention of harming myself or anyone else. It was more the fact of I just needed somewhere different. I needed fresh air, a walk to get my thoughts out, whatever it is. Sometimes things just build up and just get too much, and you just need a little release as such. And that was it. I was going for walks in the middle of the night, and I remember it being freezing cold, walking, along the streets and no one about, but it was just what I needed at the time.
Okay. I do a lot of this type of conversations with men, and over again, it's this, I just bottled it up. I didn't talk about it. I kept it within. Where were you on that, Rich? Was it suppress it and it'll go away? Or was there a moment when you suddenly just went, I cannot cope this? And tell me about that.
So the way I describe it in the book, and this is generally how it felt to me, was essentially, if you go to a block of flats or apartments, and there's little pigeonholes, as it were, for post, and it's like the post person has just come in and just dropped the post on the floor, and over time that's just built up to the point where it's just now overflowing. And you hear that saying, the straw that broke the camel's back. It was essentially like that. It was just this one last thing. This little Archie has just come along, not meaning to hurt anyone, trying to just be the cutest baby that he can possibly be. And that was just a thing that was it for me. And when I turn around and say I bottle things up, I I always thought I dealt with things well. Obviously, being in the emergency services for over 10 years, I've seen a fair amount of trauma. Obviously, death and all sorts. I don't want to take this sour, but essentially, I've dealt with a lot over my career. And for me, I just always thought I dealt with it well. And this was a thing I just couldn't deal with as such. So yes, there was definitely an element of bottling it up. The biggest thing for me was when I first spoke to my friend, and there was two people I spoke to, and both asked a very poignant question. I put this on LinkedIn the other day, and it just essentially went viral. It was fantastic. But it's asking, "How are you?" twice. The first time they said, "How are you?" I did what everyone else did, and I said, "Yeah, I'm not too bad, thanks," or "Yeah, I'm okay, thank you." But then they said, "No, actually, how are you?" And that second question was a thing that allowed me to just speak my mind. And you know what? When I did, it was literally like someone had just taken a weight off my shoulders. It really felt like that I was kind of free in a way, and I could actually talk about how I felt and genuinely how I felt. And this is what I try and ask people to do now: is you don't necessarily need to be a mental health first aider. You don't need to be trained, don't need to experience. Just asking, "How are you?" a second time, and generally mean it, looking someone in the eye and going, "No, actually, how are you?" That can make the difference for someone, and it could change someone's life.
Well, it's an absolutely pertinent point that we have to say the question and be prepared for the answers. But what was it that made you want to be truly authentic with that answer and say, "Do you know what, actually, I am not okay and I need some help"? There must have been something within you to say, "I need to get some help." So describe that emotion for you when it really struck home that you needed to say, "No, I'm not okay."
It's a really interesting question, actually, because trying to put a finger on things is, you know, you look back and you think, what was that one thing? And actually, I think it's an accumulation of different things, and it just turned into that conversation at that time, and that person asking that question, and it just fell out, as it were. But for me, you know, I've been working a lot. I've been trying to do all different sorts of things. None of them were really having any sort of direction. I completely felt lost in what I was doing. It just seemed like everything that I was doing was going in different directions where I wanted it to go. And you know, it got to a point where you sit back and you just think, I'm trying so hard, but I just need to, I might as well give up. Nothing's working. And that's where you know, whether you believe in the law of attraction or whatever, I mean, I certainly do, but that person decided to call me at that time, and I was actually ignoring their calls previously, and I just happened to accidentally click on it, and they happened to accidentally ask me the question twice. Whether they noticed something was wrong or not, I don't know, but you know, it just happened that all happened in a sequence, and that allowed me to start the journey of recovery, as it were.
Okay, so I heard you there talking about whether they noticed, and I've done enough conversations with people who have been through some difficult situations. For you now, knowing what you know and being through the journey yourself and probably do some research, what are some of the indicators to say this person might need some help?
It's a really interesting question, because you know, when you look online, and this is one of the first things I did, was I typed in like sort of how I was feeling. I then typed in postnatal depression in men. I found next to nothing. But actually, some of the things that women go through, I was literally ticking all the boxes with that. You know, I was feeling angry. I was feeling upset. Things were changing. You know, the little things in life which just started to bug me. You know, like you said about the sleep was a big one. You know, putting on weight or losing weight was another thing. Yeah, eating habits. But the biggest thing that really stood out to me was the fact that my hobbies, I couldn't stand some of my hobbies. You know, I used to absolutely love cricket, to beyond belief. You know, it was a massive passion of mine, played for pretty much my whole life. I loved it. And I was like, I couldn't even think, let alone play cricket. I wanted to be as far away from a cricket pitch that I could ever be. And, you know, for me, it was just like that worrying sign of, I don't want to do that, or I don't want to go and see any friends, or I don't want to go and, you know, socialize with people. You know, all these things that I used to find fun and have enjoyment, just didn't care. I didn't want to know. And having that carefree attitude, people were like, oh, it's great to be carefree, but when it's things that you should be caring about and you need to care about, again, that was the worrying sign for me. So yeah, obviously people say, oh, it's all about, you know, feeling sad, feeling upset, etc. And say, yes, I was feeling sad and upset at times, and there was things that made me upset, you know, randomly. But the biggest thing for me was that the things I enjoyed the most, I just, yeah, didn't.
Well, I mean, I love the title of the book, you know, Life Behind the Mask. And that is the thing, isn't it? We managed to put a layer over us to show the outside world that actually we're doing fine. Yes, we are being the stereotypical dad, and we're doing all the things we should be doing. And the Facebook pictures are great, holding baby and looking lovely at their eyes. But behind that veneer, there's a lot of vulnerability in there. So you had that moment, and you know, diagnosis was the realization you're needing some help. The trick is to then move forward and ask for help and go into recovery mode. Describe what you did.
So interestingly enough, that was harder to say than I originally anticipated. But like, I am being part of the emergency services. You know, obviously I spoke to a couple of friends who asked me, am I okay? And, you know, that felt like a weight lifted off the shoulder, just allowed me to be able to talk about things, about how I'm feeling. And at that time, there was a massive thing about mental health within men in the fire service. And, you know, someone started a 909 walk and talk, event, as it were. So it's essentially firefighters and other emergency service workers getting together as a group of men, talking about what they're going through at the moment and just going on a walk. I was invited to one of these by a colleague and a friend, and you know, they said to me, look, would you come along and support? And I said, yeah, I don't need it, but I'll come and support you, knowing full well that I actually did need it. So I came along, and you know, when everyone went round in a circle and talked about some of the things they were going through, and it came to me. And the hardest thing about it was that my boss was there as well. He had already admitted he was vulnerable and said that he was struggling with something. And I turned around and said, this is my opportunity to just say how I feel. And I did. And I said exactly how I felt. And then one of the guys, as I was walking around, he said to me, you know, have you ever thought about reaching out for some support? And I was very much in denial. I was like, I don't need that. I don't need that. I'm just going for a little something. And he was like, no, seriously, like, why don't you reach out to one of the charities and just see what they've got? And he said, even if you ask and there's nothing there for you, then, you know, you've lost nothing. You've just a phone call. And I thought, you know what, if it's just a phone call, it's just a phone call. I'll have a phone call and move on from there. And ended up getting 6 sessions of counselling and, you know, getting onto that journey of recovery. So I am very grateful for the people that were there, the people who mentioned stuff to me, and grateful to myself for allowing myself to be vulnerable and go and seek that help.
Okay. And what about your nearest and dearest, your partner, your partner's relatives? How much of an interplay and honest conversation did you have with those people?
So originally, obviously, speaking to my partner first up was quite interesting, because though she is incredibly supportive, incredibly caring, and it's quite common that in postnatal depression, that if the man is struggling, it's quite often the lady is struggling as well. And I read that, and I was trying to ask her how she felt, and again, very closed book. She was like, yeah, absolutely fine, you know, I'm tired, but I'm fine. I would then try and talk about my issues and how I was feeling, and I felt she was quite dismissive. And obviously we talk about this following this, and it's nothing that, you know, she doesn't know already. Obviously she's had access to the book. I've talked about this before, And she at the time, whether it's she didn't want to burden herself with my issues, whether it be that her focus was elsewhere on something else, whatever it might be. And, you know, there's no blame or anything towards her. But she just didn't want to know about how I was feeling at that time, or have those issues. And for me, that was hard. She used to just tell me, it's probably because you're doing too much. And my thing back to her was like, I'm doing too much because I'm struggling. Like, you know, one affects the other. So yeah, it was quite tough then talking to her after that initial conversation. The next people I really struggled to speak to were my parents. And again, maybe it's a generational thing, maybe it's that vulnerability, but speaking to my parents about how I was actually feeling was a real struggle. It took a lot of time for me to get the courage to mention something. And the funny thing is, I went to speak to them and I was like, and then they were like, go on, say it. And I was like, I think I'm struggling. And they were like, we know. And that was it. And I was like, oh, okay. How do you know? It's like, we've grown up with you. We know, you know, we've seen you for, well, 28, 29 years of our lives. We know exactly when you're struggling and when things are good. So it's okay, you can talk. And they were like, why didn't you talk? And I was like, I didn't feel I could.
The question I'm immediately going is, well, if you knew I was struggling, why didn't you ask me?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. It's exactly that. It was that question back, and it was like, their thing was like, we didn't think you can ask that question. And so it was very much that both knew either side, but it was very much, you couldn't feel like you could say certain things. And so it's quite challenging, especially when it's close to home, when someone's struggling. Again, being a parent or being a child and seeing one of your loved ones struggling, it's difficult to start those conversations. And I completely am aware of that. But my biggest thing is that actually it's those sorts of people that you really need to reach out, step outside the comfort zone and say, look, I may be barking up the wrong tree here, but is everything okay? Or can I help? Or something along those lines, just to start those conversations.
Okay. So if we were to look retrospectively back, and I'm curious, when was Archie born? Was Archie born in COVID, in terms of lockdown?
Yeah, so he was born after. So it was August 21. So it was a COVID baby, but he was born after COVID as such.
Okay. So you weren't kind of at home, and you had an opportunity to see people and meet people quite.
Yeah.
So retrospectively, looking backwards now, what kind of things would you advise both mum and dad to consider to try to prevent this postnatal depression impact that you felt?
Yeah, so there's numerous things that I'm sort of pitching for, or trying to raise awareness, is probably, rather than using that word education, because it's quite a big topic. But firstly is to start those conversations early doors. Start talking about your feelings with your partners, like as soon as you can, like, you know, before birth actually happens, you know, especially if you're a first-time parent. Talk about your concerns, how you're going to feel, you know, what's to expect, because, and you know what, you can never be ready for a new baby. You never know what it's going to be like until you go through it. And you hear it all the time. People turn around and go, oh, you don't know what it's like until you actually go through it. And I completely understand that. But start having conversations about you feel leading up to birth, and then continue those conversations after. That's when you're going to need each other the most. The second thing I'm trying to do is raise more awareness for postnatal depression in men, and especially when you're talking about online, because that was the first thing I did. You go to Dr. Google. Other search engines are available. Well, I don't want to do any product placement here, but at the end of the day, my thing was like, why am I feeling like this? And just type it into a search engine to find out. And I couldn't find much in the way of information. It was quite a struggle, and you know, you don't dig deep to find stuff when you are struggling. You kind of touch the surface on things, and that was how I felt at the time. So and the last thing is then starting to work with the NHS and other healthcare providers, because there was so many people coming in and out of our home, you know, going to different appointments, seeing midwives, seeing all different sorts of care workers, etc., people around us who could have easily asked the question and known someone may be struggling. And, you know, whether it's they don't know to, or, you know, or whether they haven't been trained to, or whatever it might be, but that is a prime time to ask people how they actually feel and if they need support. So there's 3 stages to that: one aiming at parents, one aiming at families around the parents, or close friends, and then the last one is working with the NHS and healthcare workers, just to sort of have that awareness to go and help people who may be struggling.
When I was thinking about talking to you, I was running through the steps that we take as we prepare for, you know, the new baby, and we spend more time thinking about the impact of our cats and our dogs and how the animals will not cause harm to our babies, and taking care of that. And actually, some of the most dangerous impacts are from within the family itself. I know you didn't do any of that harming stuff. Apologies, I've got a jet flying above me at the moment, if you can hear any background noise. And then conditionally, society, we always ask 2 questions: how's baby and how's mum? But maybe the third question is, hey, and how are you doing? Because you've gone from being the number one, you know, king of the road, everything's great, and suddenly the man is, from a societal norm perspective, the last thing we should be thinking about. You know, you're going to be the rock, the hard thing, the king, but we've also got our own emotions that need to be taken care of.
Absolutely. And I think that's the thing now, is now, because I've been through this, I specifically asked the dad that question. I specifically go, no, how are you actually doing? Because it is important. It is important to ask those questions. And like you said, you've gone from number 1 down to the bottom of the pile in just an instant. And everyone just assumes that you are okay and you're really happy. But when you're not, that's really hard to turn around and say, no, I'm not happy. It's just easier to go along with it. And in theory, you should be happy with a newborn. You just welcome someone else into your family. It should be a really exciting time. But when you're not feeling that, you know, you don't want to burst other people's bubbles by saying, actually, no, I feel terrible. I'm not happy. And they're like, well, why not? And you just, I can't explain it. It's a crazy sort of thing, but I do think it is a vital part of the process, is asking those questions and saying, no,
I'm very conscious of your time. So, ladies and gentlemen watching this, go and grab a book. It's on Amazon or other good resellers of books. I'm sure you can find a copy. And if any of Richard's conversation resonates with you, I'm sure you can find him on LinkedIn, Rich Wharton. Rich, have you got maybe 3 takeaways, just not necessarily associated with postnatal depression, but just looking into men as a species and how we can try to be the best versions of ourselves?
Absolutely. So I think the first thing is be happy. You know, find happiness, whatever that might be. I know a lot of society believes that we should have certain roles and responsibilities, but go and find what makes you happy. I've realized this the hard way. Okay, luckily I've realized this earlier than what some people realize it, but go and find your happiness wherever it might be, and go and enjoy that. That's probably one of the biggest things I have these days. 2, stop trying to please other people. Please yourself first. Put yourself as number 1. We get 1 attempt at this life. Let's go and enjoy it for ourselves rather than enjoying it for other people. And 3, just be you. Like, literally just be you. I know I said about being happy. I know I said about you know, go and finding your own happiness and be the person you want to be, but just be you. You know, everyone's weird in their own right, and that's okay. Just embrace who you are, be whoever you want to be, and just go and enjoy your life, because like I said, we get 1 shot at this life. Let's go and have fun in the process.
Well, you took my language. I say we have 1 life, so love life, living life. Be happy, please yourself, and also just be you. What a great takeaway. Rich Wharton, I really want to appreciate you for the time that you spent putting, you know, your thoughts into this. I would acknowledge you for your vulnerability. I'm sure there'll be somebody listening somewhere that is absolutely feeling how you were at that point in time when you asked for help. So thank you so much for your time, and good luck with the rest of your mission.
No, thank you very much. Thank you.